Mm.
the U.S.-European Union summit ahead of
Yeah, she's up.
tomorrow with Russia's Vladimir Putin. And there's news, says
Do
Santita.
White House officials think they can build goodwill with Europe ahead of that Putin meeting. To that end, they've announced the creation of a joint U.S.-EU.
The Reverend's on, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to let you all go so we're good with the sound, right?
Yes, yes.
Have a great intelligence. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
And
Thank you.
I let him go.
As well as coordinating efforts on bolstering supply chain resilience. The White House also said the two sides will discuss efforts to stem climate change and the launching of an expert group to determine how best to reopen travel safely as
Hey,
the
Santita.
Hey, hon, how are you? Ebbs.
The first state to
Doing
lock down
great.
against the coronavirus is opening up.
Thank you for
California is
sending
lifting
the
most of
article.
its COVID-19
I thought you
restrictions
brought it.
starting
That was
today.
great read.
Here's our Ed Donahue.
Governor Gavin
It was
Newsom says
great.
the state reached this point because of the work of Californians.
No
Yeah.
more physical distancing
He is
requirements, no more
brilliant
caps
mind.
on occupancy,
Brilliant.
moving beyond the blueprint, aligning
Yeah.
with the CDC on masks, mandates.
But the governor
Yep.
points out the virus is still out there.
We're not done.
To get more people vaccinated, the state is offering
Yes, ma'am.
vacations and cash prizes.
The heat across the West is record-shattering and dangerous, says the Weather Service. It's going to be 105 degrees today in Salt Lake City, Utah, 117 in Phoenix. China says it's detected no unusual radiation outside that nuclear power plant near Hong Kong, following a news report of a leak. Nuclear experts say it appears gas might be leaking from fuel rods inside the reactor in the plant. CNN says U.S. officials do not think there's a severe safety
Yes,
threat.
ma'am.
This is AP News.
But you know what? I am proud of the work that he did, and I let him
A
know
U.S.
that, particularly
intelligence
after I read that
report
article.
warns of the potential for more violence by QAnon followers. Here's our Mike Gracia.
A new report compiled by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security warns some
Yeah.
adherents of the QAnon
Yes.
conspiracy theory could target Democrats
Yes,
or other
ma'am.
political opponents for more
So,
violence. The
we
report
want
was
that.
released Monday
Yeah,
by Senator
but
Martin
it's
Heinrich, a Democrat
I'm gonna post
representing
it
New
a little
Mexico.
later
The
today.
report warns some QAnon
couldn't get
adherents
the
could come
picture
to believe
with
they
it,
have an
which is what I was
obligation
trying
to
to
engage
do.
in real-world violence.
Okay.
While he was in
I was
office,
trying to do
President
that.
Donald Trump praised QAnon followers
And
as people that love our
anyway,
country. According
how's
to an
the family?
Associated Press review of court records,
Everybody's
these
doing well.
20
Thank you for
QAnon
asking.
followers are among those charged with federal crimes related to the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Mike Gracia,
I have to
Washington.
log into
The
Facebook
Dow dropped
every time I
85
come
points
on. It is-
yesterday.
this is
The S&P was up 7.
Ugh.
The NASDAQ was up
It's like
104.
you all
I'm
know.
Rita Foley, AP News.
You all know who I am. What is this?
This is 820 AM,
Exactly. Exactly.
WCPT Willow Springs, and streaming worldwide
You
at
know, and the thing is, you don't have a choice.
WCPT820.com. We are Chicago's
But
progressive
Mhm.
talk,
but to
where
use it.
facts matter.
Correct.
Now,
They
here's
got it.
Yeah, they got us.
820
Well,
Chicago traffic
this is how the
updates.
thing works, right?
In
Yes,
North
ma'am.
Aurora, traffic signals continue to flash red at 25 and 56. There were down lines in the area
So,
there
hey, Mark, hey,
yesterday.
Linear Bob out there
Traffic
in
on the
San
inbound
Jose. I know
Stevenson
the
is
way.
slow. Lamont Road at
Linda, I'm
83
on
and
my
then
way to
First Avenue
California.
to around
Yay!
Betsy.
One of my best
Travel
friends is
time
getting
is
married.
31
So
minutes
we're gonna
on
have
the
a lot of
Veterans
fun.
Memorial
The
Tollway,
week
Lakeshore
before
Drive, outbound
our
21.
birthday season.
Inbound Ryan has delays from 95th
Carol,
to
That's
Carol,
it.
53rd and
oh,
It's on the
look.
way.
Oh, look, I can't wait. I
14
cannot
minutes,
wait.
95th to downtown, outbound 11.
Francis,
Bishopport inbound,
Michael,
you've got about a
and
2-minute delay
Paula.
now from
Hello,
103rd to
everybody.
Merge.
Thank you so much for
Eastbound
being
8094
with us today.
exits to
We're
Calumet
going to be
Avenue
talking
and
about the
Indianapolis
Supreme Court.
Boulevard have
Mitch
reopened
McConnell
for now.
says that he is
Scheduled
going
to close
to
again on Saturday. That's
he's going to
traffic.
do
I'm
in
Talamonte.
20 if he wins the midterms, he's going to block
Remember when you get to work to hop over to
he's going to block
WCPT820.com or the
President
TuneIn Radio app
Biden's
and
Supreme
stream
Court
The Stephanie
pick.
Miller Show. Weekdays 8 to
And this
11
time it
a.m.
could be
on
a black
Chicago's Progressive
in
Talk,
line
where
for the
facts
Supreme
matter.
Court pick. So that ought to be interesting.
There is
But
truth
it's
and there
all
are
interesting.
lies.
It's a mess.
Lies told
And
for
then
power and for
we're going to
profit.
talk about
And each of us has a duty and a
who this person
responsibility
is.
as citizens, as Americans,
Ketanji Brown,
to
she was
defend
just
the truth
elected for
and defeat the
the
lies.
D.C.
You're listening to
the U.S. Court of
WCPT
Appeals,
820 because
which
facts
is
matter.
the last stop before you go to the Supreme Court.
Chicago is a roll up your sleeves and get the job done kind of town. Empowering Chicago, that's more than an idea. It's what they do.
Thank you. You don't have to turn it off. Just turn it down because I need to make sure. Thank you. That we're still there.
And the Electrical
So anyway,
Contractors Association
but
of Chicago and Cook
we
County.
and we're going to have Stephen.
It's a minute. we're going to have the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. He's basically the president of the Cherokee Nation, Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin. You heard about the 215 children they found buried in a mass grave underneath that relocation school in Canada, right? Well,
Yes.
they're more than they're looking for like 10,000 kids. Oh,
Just 30 seconds.
they put 150,000 indigenous kids in the children in these relocation schools, trying to Europeanize them. So I'm going to talk with him about that today. I'm very, very excited to do it.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Determined, unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious.
Hey, everybody, it is Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. Boy, this is the day I graduated from high school. I just remembered that. Wow, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. WCPT, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Call me or text me at 773 763 9278 773 763 WCPT. If you want to text me at that number, GWC Injury Lawyers gives you the opportunity to do that. And so I want to hear from you today as we talk about the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell says that if he becomes the majority leader again after the midterms, he is planning to do in 2023 or 2024 what he did to President Barack Obama. Different president, same game. And now we have Judge Ketanji Brown. She's an African-American woman. Many people expect her to be the nominee to the Supreme Court. She was just elevated to the D.C. Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals. That's big, big, big. That's the last stop before you get to the Supreme Court. What's going to happen and how can that be dealt with? Well, first of all, you got to register to vote, everybody. That ought to incentivize you to vote in 2022. Please get out and vote. Dylan, I'm getting some feedback, so let's get this party started. And of course, we're going to have good news with our Reverend Stephen Thurston, the teaching pastor from Salem Baptist Church, the House of Hope. And then we're going to have a very special guest. I'm very honored to have this man with us, the Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin. Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. They are a nation, and he is their president. And he's going to be on with us talking about these indigenous children they have found in Canada. They had relocation schools. They wanted to Europeanize indigenous children. And in their efforts to do that, and we did that here in the United States, you put children in largely Catholic-run schools. And in this school, they found 215 children, a mass grave. But it turns out there are thousands of children who went missing after their parents put them in these schools, or after they were forced. They were actually forced to be put in these schools. They were forcibly put in these schools. They were taken from their families. And there's as many as 10,000 who are missing, if not even more. So we've got to talk about that today because it's so ugly. And of course, we'll have John Nichols talking about what's happening in Florida with, well, I guess this kind of relates, setting the history, getting history straight. Everybody talks about critical race theory. It's really just, you know what, we can put a new label on it. It's just about writing the history correctly. That's all it is. If you're not writing the history correctly, if you're not telling the whole truth, you're not telling the truth at all, which is a lie. So this is about getting history straight. All right, everybody. Today I'm dedicating the show to the great Ned Beatty. Of course, many of us remember him from Deliverance, and he was the wingman for Burt Reynolds in so many movies. He was in Nashville, All the President's Men, Network. I had the privilege of having traveled with him when he endorsed Reverend Jesse Jackson for president in 1988. I couldn't believe it when he popped up on the bus. I was like, whoa, that's Ned Beatty. what? And he was an enthusiastic campaigner. Lovely, lovely, lovely man. Many people you all didn't know he had those kind of politics, did you? Uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, he did. But he was a really fine gentleman, and he was a brilliant, brilliant actor. And I bet you didn't know that he was also a great singer. Absolutely. Dedicating the show today to the great Ned Beatty. Let's get to some of these headlines. Chicago's going to have a high of 72 degrees, sunny. Minneapolis, St. Paul, you are much warmer than we are. 85 degrees will be your high today, sunny. The Dow closed down 85 points. The NASDAQ closed up, 64 points. And the S&P 500 closed up 7 points. The Twins, well, they fell to the Mariners. Mariners 4, Twins 3. They'll be facing off once again today. The White Sox, well, they didn't fare too well against the Rays. Rays 5, the White Sox 2. They'll be facing off again today. The Cubs, they fell too. The Mets 5, the Cubs 2. They'll be facing off against today. Come on, teams. Let's get with the program. Well, the NBA playoffs keep rolling along. The Hawks 103, the 76ers 100, the Clippers 118, the Jazz 104, and the Bucks will be playing the Nets tonight. Everybody is getting ready to see what's going to happen between Russian President Putin and the United States President Joe Biden. White House allies say that he will go into a meeting with open eyes and well prepared to confront Putin over Russia's aggressive conduct and to lay out consequences for further provocations. The Wednesday meeting is expected to be frosty, and the White House has set expectations low, saying Biden's goal is to put the U.S. on a path to a more predictable relationship with Moscow. It is certain to draw a sharp contrast to the 2018 summit between then President Trump and Putin in Helsinki, during which, as you recall, President Trump triggered enormous controversy by doubting U.S. intelligence, our own intelligence, our assessment of the Russian election interference during a joint press conference. So we will see how all of that goes. Infrastructure is building momentum is building in the Senate for an infrastructure bill, $1.2 trillion. Of course, the president initially proposed more than $2 trillion, but there has been compromise. After some rocky negotiations last week, new pressure is to get a deal done. And that's led some liberal leaders to agree to a smaller package. Do we need more infrastructure or less, everybody? Well, they might just get something through. Great talking point for the campaign in 2022. COVID-19 infections are on the decline, but vaccination efforts could be a top priority for years to come, according to experts. That's because the virus mutates over time. We've already seen it happen with several dangerous variants that have emerged. We'll, of course, be asking Dr. Deborah Holden about that shortly, because she said the pandemic is endemic. That is, she said COVID-19 will be with us forever. Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell has vowed to block a possible Biden Supreme Court pick in election year 2024. We will be talking about that at the bottom of the hour. But in the meantime, we have got the brilliant and anointed Pastor Stephen Thurston II from the Salem Baptist Church. Of course, he's their teaching pastor, and he's the author of the book Mirror Moments. And I'm so glad to have you with us today. Bet you didn't know Ned Beatty had such progressive politics, did you?
I did not. You are always dropping brand new knowledge.
I almost fell over when he walked on the bus. I was like, wait a minute. What? Huh?
What's he doing here?
Now, what's he doing here? Thank you, because the campaign was almost run by Casey Kasem and his wife. Can you believe that?
Gotcha.
They said
wow.
Campaign workers stayed in their house. That is the great Casey Kasem,
wow.
the DJ. And he was also Lebanese, and he appreciated. My father married him and his wife in 1978, 79, and so. Unbeknownst to us, when Reverend started running in 1983, he rented a bus and went through Michigan, because that's the greatest concentration of the Arab American community in the United States, and started campaigning for Reverend on his own. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Amazing.
We had some really great people, and he paid for he pulled together the funds, shall I say, for a TV show that we did the night before the California primary in 1988 that he hosted. have some really great memories. I need to write about that because we met some really, really great
Please
people.
do.
Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
I
This
should.
is rich history.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got to share it with the world.
Well, yeah, because we don't, that's why it's important not to paint with such a broad brush with people because you really
Yes,
don't
ma'am.
know.
You don't know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
So, give us some good news. That was some good news because he led a good life, a
Guess what?
great life, and I love that. What's going on,
Yeah, I got
Reverend
I got a
Thurston?
little bit more for us today.
I love it.
Well, listen, learning to live in the moment is a special gift that's developed in a healthy childhood. And that's ideally when we discover simple pleasures, Santita, like playing with crayons and learning to ride a bike and making friends. And it doesn't matter their race, nationality, or anything. We just find other kids who seem fun and we connect with them. But sometimes terrible things happen that twist happiness into something horrible. It could be a parent's rage, a bully's ridicule, bouts of depression, or waves of loneliness that can shatter a moment's joy to pieces. So, how can you enjoy being with a friend, discover what makes you laugh, or feel good about yourself when it all might come crashing down at any moment? If you tend to worry that something bad will happen if you dare enjoy the here and now, you're a person who's always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Though it's a sentiment I hear often, let me remind the listeners today that you don't have to live a life where you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. If you think this way, let me ask you a few questions. Do you have any trauma in your history? Did you grow up in an environment without secure attachment? Did you grow up in a family where one or both of your parents frightened you or were even frightened themselves? See, all of these things may be at the root of your worrying behavior. A chronic state of hyperarousal is a coping mechanism that makes sense in a given traumatic upbringing. Now, moving forward, I want to encourage us today that there is hope because these coping skills can be replaced with newer, healthier ones that serve for a bright future, not a traumatic past. Preparing for disaster, be it big or small, is something that's common among trauma survivors who regularly feel hypervigilant. Being hyper aware was once necessary as a survival mechanism that kept you safe, but it's a coping skill that's no longer working in your life. You may not need it anymore. It may be actually hindering your growth, your healing, your contentment, and your relationships, professional and platonic. So if you're always anticipating the worst, if you're always double checking with people in your life by saying, are you sure to everything they present? If you're always prepared with the plan B, I want you to know today that you don't have to live like this. Life doesn't have to be this hard. You don't have to feel like this. And perhaps you think it's just part of who I am right now. Listen, it's not. It's a coping mechanism that you learn, and it can be helped and healed by noticing it, number one. So let me give you 3 important steps that you can take towards healing worried thoughts and actions that don't serve you anymore. Number 1, have an honest and compassionate dialogue with yourself. Yes, it's all right to talk to yourself sometimes and answer yourself. Forget about what other people are thinking around you. Because being compassionate with yourself is where healing starts. Number 2, experience a secure relationship in therapy. Therapy and therapists, they are bad people. Therapy isn't a bad word. Consistency is a powerful force that can help you to heal, and therapy is an excellent place to build consistent, secure relationship with an individual. Third and finally, have a conversation with your loved ones to help you heal. You got to build secure attachment in your personal relationships. So let me close by saying this: hope is available, compassion is available, healing is available, and a future filled with pleasant moments without waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's possible for you, and it can start today. Let's move forward without worrying so much about when the shoe is going to drop.
I love that. I love that. It's ironic. I was just talking to a friend about that. He was saying that he experienced some trauma and it shut
Yeah.
him down for years. He said, none of his relationships could go but so far
Mm.
because Well, I mean, he lost someone very close and very near and dear to him. And I said,
Yeah,
okay, I get it, because we all have that, but we don't have to keep it, right? So
yeah,
thank you for
yeah.
that. Thank you. I needed to hear that. And it's so funny. I just had this conversation with him last night. I was like, okay.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Oh, right on time. Right on time.
Right on time.
Oh yeah, Pastor Stephen Thurston. Everybody, get the book Mirror Moments. You'll get more of this, and you need it. You need it. You need it. Of course, he is at the Salem Baptist Church. He's their teaching pastor, and which is the House of Hope. What are you going to be preaching again on Sunday, Stephen? Pastor Thurston.
I've got. It won't be until July. I've got the next couple of Sundays off.
Oh, praising the Lord! But we miss you. But
But
how can we
I'll
see
let you know.
your other sermons? Where can we go?
You sure? Great question. You can go to our YouTube page or our Facebook page, the official Salem Baptist Church of Chicago. All of the content is there, or you can head to my website, StephenJThurston.com. I'd love to connect with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's Stephen PH, everybody. So, we've got one of
That's
your
it.
favorite people with us, Dr. Deborah Holden,
Yeah.
Associate Dean of Public Health at Michigan State University. Indeed, she's one of the world's preeminent epidemiologists. So let's talk with her. Dr. Deborah Holden, what's on your mind?
She dropped.
Okay, well let's call her back. Let's call her back because since she was on before, but I want to ask her about COVID-19 because now
Check your text.
more and more people are vaccinated, and but the numbers, and they're finding that the people who've been where you have vaccination rates that are high, hospitalization is not high, which is what these shots promised. They didn't promise that you wouldn't get COVID-19. They didn't promise that you couldn't spread it, but they did say that if you got it, you would not be hospitalized. So that is good news, and that's bearing itself out. But I wanted to ask her today about that, and will we reach herd immunity? More and more Americans are getting these shots. What will it take for us to reach herd immunity? 70% of Americans have gotten at least one shot, but that's still not fully immunized, fully inoculated. That doesn't get us there. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. So I want to know what you think. What do you think? What do you think? And have you gotten your shots? Well, you don't have to tell me. I mean, 'cause certainly that's very, very personal. You don't have to say it. But how are you feeling about this? Because more than half of Americans still have not gotten the shots. And what about children who are going back to school who are going to be required, particularly college students, to get these shots? How do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable if you haven't gotten the shot? Do you feel comfortable with your child getting these shots? I mean, these are things that people are thinking about and wrestling with. And I want to know what your thoughts are. 773 WCPT, 773 Dylan, let's try to continue to call Dr. Deborah Holden.
It's going to voice.
If we cannot get her, I know it's going to voicemail, but if we cannot get her, let us try. Let's just continue to try. But let's think about that, everybody. In the meantime, let me switch gears. What about Mitch McConnell? What about Mitch McConnell? The 2022 midterms are upon us. And many people are saying that the Republicans are very, very quietly gearing up. Not so quietly, they're changing voting laws all over the country. They are preparing to win, to recapture the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate. They're positioned well to do so, even though Democrats did win the presidency resoundingly. They lost every place else just about down ticket. So they're prepared to go state by state by state by state and win, but they're also hedging their bets by making it harder for everybody to vote. In the meantime, we might have a Supreme Court pick on the line. This is why you need to get registered to vote. It's so important. It is imperative that you get registered to vote. We have got A Supreme Court pick on the line. They just elevated Ketanji Brown. Who is she? We're going to find out from attorney C.K. Hoffler exactly who she is. But she's someone who's very, very highly regarded. And she could become the first African American woman to go to the Supreme Court. She was just nominated to be on the D.C. U.S. Court of Appeals. That is the last stop before you go to the Supreme Court. And she's on track. But Mitch McConnell has said, you know what? Whoever Biden nominates, I'm going to block. What do you think about that? What do you think about this? Ketanji Brown Jackson. If she's put up, he said, I'm going to block her. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do. And the only way that he will be able to do that is if we do not vote. You've got to hold on to the majority in the U.S. Senate. You've got to hold on to the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. And you've got to apply the pressure. If you feel your vote does not matter, think about that. He's sending out a dog whistle. It's not really a dog whistle to his people. He's sending out a dog whistle. You know, and let me tell you, that is incentivizing people who agree with his politics all over the country. It's incentivizing people to vote, to get registered to vote. They're going to do that. Now, what are you going to do? And I mean, I'm speaking to people. I'm speaking to you, Linear Bob, out in California, Carol Soskin out in California. I'm talking to everybody. Big Bree, Carol Crowley, Brian Martin, Daryl Prunty, Mark, and is Nigel registered to vote, our high school graduate? I hope so. That was what my parents made me do. Well, I graduated at 17, but as soon as I turned 18, my father had me taken downtown so I could get registered. Get registered to vote, everybody. If this is the reason to vote. A Supreme Court seat is on the line. But now some other people are saying, okay, Mitch McConnell, you can do whatever you want to do. We need to expand the court anyway by 3 to 4 seats. What do you think about that? Should we expand the court? Should we register to vote or do both? Do it all. Throw everything against the wall. Call me. Text me at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Should we expand the court? Should there be more seats on the court? You know, the House of Representatives has not moved in terms of its population in more than 100 years. It's ridiculous. I mean, we're not tens of millions of Americans anymore. We're more than 330 million. So we need to have more representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. Certainly, they need to work out representation in the U.S. Senate, all over the place. That's what needs to happen. But right now, Mitch McConnell is telling you that no matter who is nominated, no matter what, he's going to shoot down the nomination of President Biden. Wow. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? Well, I tell you what, you can do something about it. You have power, and you need to use it. Get registered to vote. Tell your friends to get registered to vote. That is the only thing that can stop this. What about expanding the court? You have power there too. You need to call your representatives and say, expand the court. You need to call your representatives and tell Nancy Pelosi to expand the House of Representatives, because that should happen too. Let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. Text me at that number. Thank you, GWC Lawyers. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Okay. C.K. Hoffler's here, and Deborah Furholden said she didn't know what happened. Let me call her.
Yeah, I don't know.
She's texting me. I'm gonna bring her up so I can find
out. Okay, I'll call her back now.
No, she's not gonna be on this segment, but I want to find out what happened.
Okay, I can tell you what happened here. At least is I had her up and then she dropped.
It's happened before, so I'm trying to avoid it. This is not about calling. I don't call people out, Dylan. What I try to do is resolve issues. Okay.
No, I feel that. I definitely feel that.
That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to find out what happened so we can avoid this problem going forward. Okay, can you bring up a C.K. Hoffler, Attorney Hoffler?
My apologies. One second. Somebody, I guess, called.
Okay. Okay. Okay, something is wrong with your phone. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. CK? Hello, hello. Dylan, please bring up
She's
CK.
on.
Okay, bring her up so she can respond.
You should be able to hear her now.
Now, CK?
I'm here.
Okay.
Good morning.
Hey,
Yeah.
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much. I'm going to start off with the Supreme Court and the expansion of it, and then we can talk about the possibility for filling a possible vacancy. Katanji.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been talking about her for quite some time. But how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
You know what? I
really am.
need to speak with you. I mean, like real soon.
Okay.
I mean, like as soon as we can.
As soon as we can? Okay. Later tonight is good. At night is better for me than during the day.
Oh,
Yeah,
no worries.
after. Yeah.
I'll call you tonight.
So we can talk tonight. We can take any time after 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So that would be 7 o'clock your time.
I will call you. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Need your guidance on
great.
something. Need you to help me to do something because I got a couple of things I need to get done. So there's that. But okay, but it's good. Good hearing your voice. You know, I'm going to have Cherokee. Thank you. Chuck Hoskin on. Now, the principal chief, he's the principal chief, of course, of the Cherokee Nation, which he's the president of the Cherokee Nation. They, the so-called tribes, they are nations. They are nations. And he's going to be talking with us about these disturbing findings at one of these relocation schools that they forced indigenous people to send their children to. And we did that here in the United States too, but in one school that was run by the Catholic Church, they found a mass grave filled with 215 children.
Oh, gosh.
I can't even. But guess what?
It doesn't surprise me.
Thousands of these kids have vanished. At least 10,000 of them. I mean, you know, when I read it, I was like, I mean, I knew these stories, but now they're beginning to track in another way. And I just said, you know, with far more precision. And I said, wait a minute, you mean just thinking of 215 babies? They just threw into a mass
because
grave.
that's what they do.
Like,
right. And when there's no accountability whatsoever. So
now the Canadian government is calling on the Pope to apologize. Yeah, he sure ought to.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah. And y'all need to apologize too, which Prime Minister Trudeau did do.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Determined, unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. WCPT 820 in Chicago, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. 773-763-WCPT. 773-763-9278. What do you think of this? Now, Mitch McConnell was talking to Hugh Hewitt, who is a very, very well-known right-wing talk radio host. I hate to describe him that way. He is a talk radio host. Now he has a right-wing philosophy, but he's a talk radio host, and he has a tremendous platform. I mean, a huge platform. And so he was interviewing Mitch McConnell, and he wanted to know what would happen after the midterms. He says, well, if I become the majority leader, it is highly unlikely, as he put it, that he would allow Biden to fill a Supreme Court vacancy in 2024. That he would allow. What do you think of that? And that's very interesting because now we have a woman named Ketanji Brown Jackson. Ketanji Brown Jackson, very highly regarded lawyer. She's just been nominated to the D.C. U.S. Court of Appeals. That is the last stop before you go to the High Court, to the Supreme Court. Everyone is expecting her to be the nominee. Biden's nominee. She's a fairly young woman, 50 years of age, respected, renowned jurist. That would be interesting. So, of course, I had to get our people's attorney, our legal eagle, to talk about it. And I've got Jewel, C.K. Hoffler, president of the National Bar Association and chair of Rainbow Push. Before I even bring on any of the callers, talk to me. What did you think when you heard Mitch McConnell say, "I will not allow"?
Well, good morning, Santita. Well, I was really appalled. I mean, I would not allow. First of all, I think sometimes senators and congresspeople, our elected officials, get it wrong. They mistakenly believe that they are representing themselves, that they're representing their own interests. They are representing the people. And so it was just appalling that Mitch McConnell would say what he's not going to allow to happen. Now, mind you, we knew that he would block or try to block any U.S. Supreme Court justice that the Biden administration would try to put through or push through in the nomination process. But it's just appalling to me that he takes these things as his own personal point of pride. Well, what he's going to block and what he's not going to block, what he's going to do and what he's not going to do. And I think there's just something that reeks of just disgrace, quite frankly. It's appalling that any senator would say that. And we've got to move away from and hold these senators' feet to the fire. We keep electing people who, in these jurisdictions, in states, who are saying these outrageous things, and they feel emboldened because they feel like, well, I can say these outrageous things, I can do these outrageous things, and I can still get elected. So, yeah, I was completely appalled. We have one of the nation's best positioned African-American women to be a real contender to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court. There's so many extraordinary African-American women who could serve, but she's well positioned. And so it is my hope, and we certainly at the National Bar Association, when she was first nominated, we supported her candidacy. We do know her. She's one of us. And we will continue to support her just as we supported so many others. And we who have been nominated to diversify the federal judiciary. And we sincerely hope that this will not become an outrageous political issue, because she is the best candidate. And it's about time. Just think about it. In the history of this court, there's never been an African-American woman. That's disgraceful.
Well,
that really is disgraceful.
It is disgraceful, but it's happening. And, and it's happening while we're about to go into the midterms. I mean, look, it's a very real possibility that he could become the majority leader once again if these voting rights, which are being scaled back radically, if that works, and it really can. And if we do not, my father often says, well, when you're further behind, you got to work harder, you got to run faster. So that means we need to over-index in the registration. We got to out-register people to vote.
We do. We do. We've been in a sad place before, Santita. It's just that we didn't think we'd be back here so quickly. But that's why we can never take our eye off the prize. When it comes to being an advocate for voting rights, for civil rights, but in this particular instance for voting rights, you can never rest on any laurels. You can never take your eye off the prize, because just as you're taking strides ahead and voter registration and voting rights and getting out the vote, people are chipping away at the fabric of voting rights and trying to suppress the right to vote. And it's even now more aggressive than ever. So despite all of the voter suppressive laws that are in almost 30 states, new laws that have been imposed in 30 states like Georgia, like Texas, and others, or Texas is fighting very, very hard, shall I say. We have to double our efforts at pushing through and making sure that people vote. And we have to make sure that they're voting for things that are important to our agenda.
Absolutely. Let me go to Jewel from New York. Jewel, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Good morning. I barely have a voice. I got to wake up early for you, Santita. God bless you.
God bless you, girl. You sound great. You sound all energized. Get out of here. You don't have a voice. Get out. CK, can you believe Jewel? Oh, come on.
Oh, my God. I just wanted to say God bless you. It's a joy waking up to hearing your voice, knowing all what you and your family stand for, making things better for our people. Amen. I just had to say that. I'll tell you more. I'll tell you more in due time. But I just had to reach out. I just had to reach out and tell you and all your distinguished guests. God bless you all. God bless you all. The hugest blessing that He got to give. Amen.
Amen. Oh, you have blessed me this morning,
Thank
Miss Jewel. Thank you for that.
Yes, you have blessed me. Yes, and I'll call again. Thank you very much.
God
Yes.
bless you. Oh, my goodness. Now, you know what? Jewel has made my day. Thank you. And I pray that you will be blessed, Jewel, and let us all bless each other in that way. Hallelujah. Thank you so much.
We have to.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you ready to, now you all are about to have, are you in New York City?
I'm in New York. I'm in the rural part of New York. I'm in Long Island, in Suffolk County.
Okay, but what are you hearing about the mayoral election? Because see now, C.K. Hoffler, I mean, Jewel is like, she's in New York, even though she's not in the city. You got this mayoral race that is of tremendous consequence. What are you hearing about that, Jewel?
Yes, they have a bunch of candidates. They have a lot of candidates, and from what I'm hearing, they have a type of voting mechanism where you can pick, I believe, like 5 candidates, something that you prefer, and something or other about if a guy that you like doesn't get picked, there's still another chance that another guy you like could get picked. Something like that. I'm understanding from what I gather.
They call it ranked choice. Ranked
choice.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Do you agree with ranked choice voting? I mean, do you like that?
Well, if anything to get more shots at the game, more shots at the game, it seems like a better thing, I guess. At least you get a chance to keep your issues on the table.
Okay. So you like having a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, a number 4, a number 5. So at least you're saying that it could make you feel more satisfied as a voter.
Well, there's certain issues that all candidates are not standing for. So if you have an issue that you want to see something happen on, the idea that your issue might come up on another guy's platform, it doesn't seem like a bad idea because these issues have to be pulled onto the table.
Okay. Are you ready for the 2022 midterms?
Yes, I am. Oh, yes, I am. Definitely. We have to put our foot on the gas with these voting rights because if we don't, we won't have any rights at all. You hear me now? Hear me good.
I hear you. Now, what do you think about this black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who she's about to book, if she passes it, if her nomination goes through, she will be on the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C., and everyone is saying that Biden is going to nominate her for the Supreme Court. Do you think that will get people excited about voting? So you can make sure that Mitch McConnell is not the majority leader?
Yes. Oh, yes. Most definitely, yes. I agree.
Okay. All right. Well, now you know it. Now here, I mean, now CK, and she says she has no voice. Get out of here.
Well, but Santita, while we were talking about New York, and then we should come back to Ketanji Brown Jackson. There's some African American contenders, real contenders, as I understand, in New York that are running for mayor. And so I'd be curious to hear if in the field, because I'm getting different reviews, frankly, every week. Would our callers feel that those contenders, how they're doing, how they're ranking? Are they in the top 3 or 4?
What do you think?
Wow.
Are you Jewel? Are you hearing anything about? I mean, because you have Maya
Ray
McGuire, you have Eric
Adams.
That's right. So I mean, and they're all. I mean, I know Ray McGuire. Uh, we know all these people, and they're all great people. Um, but they have different thrusts.
Gwen Carr likes Ray McGuire, so I'm going to probably stick with who Gwen Carr likes.
Okay. Okay. And then a lot of people like Eric Adams. A lot of people. I mean, Maya Wiley's support is growing. It's going to be very interesting to
Yeah,
see.
she's showing civil rights.
Yeah, yeah. It's
It's
going to
going
be
to be
interesting to
amazing.
see. Okay.
It's true because Eric Adams went to John Jay,
Uh-huh.
and I went to John Jay years ago, so he's an alumni of mine. So it's really, I'm glad to see them all run.
Okay.
You understand?
Okay.
And they're all running at the same time. Hey, but more the better.
Well, I'm sending you much love, Miss Jewel, and you make sure you call back, okay?
Yes, I definitely will. Have a blessed day, everybody.
Love you
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
You
you
too.
so much. Well, I mean, but
Thank you.
if
Bye-bye.
politics, thank you so much, Jewel. Politics have changed so much since well, Reverend said when he announced that he would run for the presidency in 1983, that as of this day, American politics will never be the same, and that is absolutely true, because up to that point, you did not have I mean, a black person could even get close to the mayor's office in New York City,
Yeah.
and now we see several people in contention. Um, and but it's but we have to even go further because his thing was and still is, it's about progressive politics. And that's
Yeah.
why seeing one person, I mean, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it with Joe Manchin. We're seeing one person who represent a minority opinion nationally. They have they have the opportunity, CK, to turn the whole country around on a minority opinion. This is not the majority opinion, CK.
Yeah. And that is in and of itself devastating. Devastating. We talked about over the weekend at Keep Hope Alive Santita, as you recall, the efforts of Barbara Arnwine and others in West Virginia to really, just in response to the community outpouring of support against Joe Manchin and the position that he's taking and For the People Act and other really, really important measures that are coming before the Senate and bills that are coming before the Senate. I think we have to really look at voting rights, civil rights, and justice differently in today's environment. It's so different. And the balance in the Senate is so very slight and delicate that does allow one person to manipulate. So in the midterm elections, where you've got all these voter suppressive laws, we've got to double, triple our efforts to make sure that people vote and to make sure there's not voter nullification.
Well, what should we do? Because now we've got these tremendous roadblocks to the vote. And, well, let me back up. Do you think that this could be used to incentivize people to get out and vote? I mean, just looking
Yes,
at
I think.
Ketanji Brown Jackson. But what is her record? Who is she? Because I don't think we should just support someone just because they're black, quite frankly. I think you got to.
No, and right. No, it's not just because she's black that people support her. We supported her because, quite frankly, she's highly qualified. She did clerk for Justice Stephen Breyer, and for people who, typically when you see candidates for the U.S. Supreme Court, they have Ivy League backgrounds, typically, and she does have an Ivy League background. She attended Harvard undergrad. She attended Harvard Law School. She earned her degree. She was a Bachelor of Arts degree. She graduated magna cum laude. She graduated in government. She got her law degree, graduated cum laude. She was head of the Harvard Law Review as well. She clerked for 3 federal judges. These are the traditional things that contenders for the U.S. Supreme Court have in their portfolio. And she has served with distinction every single place that she has been. She also, ironically, she clerked for Justice Stephen Breyer on the U.S. Supreme Court from 1999 to 2000. And I say ironically, I mean, so that's very, very important in her arsenal. She is someone who has widespread community support. She was born in Washington, D.C., but she was raised in Miami, Florida. So she covers in terms of the areas of support, her family, her base, not just, the D.C. area, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, but also Florida. And that's very important. She has distinguished herself in her community. So she's someone to support. She's someone to look at because she stands for. In terms of we can look at the opinions, we can look at what she's done, we can look at her track record, and we can talk about her notable rulings. And I think that's why people should support her. They should really look at some of the notable rulings that she has ruled on relative to American Meat Institute. I can cite them versus U.S. Department of Agriculture. Another case, the Poon versus Department of Health and Human Services. She has taken positions as it related to the Food and Drug Administration, how they violated various acts. She has really taken positions in her opinions to hold people's feet to the fire when there has been a mistrust. She presided in AFGE, AFMCIO versus Trump, and she validated the provisions of 3 executive orders that would have limited the time a federal employee labor union officials could spend with union members. I mean, she's really ruled on some very, very significant issues that people should look at, from immigration issues to Department of Agriculture to executive orders to Department of Corrections, and her record is very impressive.
Well, so you would not cast her as a corporatist far too often, I think. The Supreme Court is corporatist. It sides with corporations. It sides with the big guy. It doesn't side with the people. And you're saying that I think does she have an even-handed approach in your opinion?
She has an even-handed approach, and I would say she is someone who calls it like she sees it. And that's who I would like to see on the U.S. Supreme Court. I would not characterize her as a corporatist. I would characterize her background as traditional, what we traditionally see. But we don't need to penalize someone who has the same, if not stronger, traditional qualifications as some of the Caucasian members of the U.S. Supreme Court. And what I like about her candidacy is that she has a broader scope in terms of her perspective. In her rulings, you can always tell by judges' rulings where they stand on issues. And on First Amendment issues, for instance, she has sided, she's someone who sides with the people many times. She looks at the evidence and she doesn't just rubber stamp her opinion or rubber stamp issues based on precedent. She's not afraid to step out there and to take strong positions. And that's what we need on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I would anticipate that she's going to be cross-examined rigorously, just as every single other Black woman who has appeared before the U.S. Senate has seen. I believe there's going to be, and this is for her current nomination, and so I think that she is a strong contender for the U.S. Supreme Court, and she's going to be cross-examination no matter what position she is up for, because that has been the trajectory for African American women. We only need to look at recently Kristen Clark, who was taken through the ringer for, in my impression, no real apparent reason. And and I think she's well prepared for it. She's well suited, and I think she will perform beautifully because that has been her trajectory.
We're talking with Attorney C.K. Hoffler, president of the National Bar Association, chair of Rainbow Push, and we're talking about Mitch McConnell, who said that he's prepared to do in 2024 what he did during the Obama administration. As you remember, he did not allow Merrick Garland to even be heard, to even be interviewed when he was nominated to the Supreme Court. Didn't allow it. But he said, I'm going to do it again. If I become the majority leader, I'm going to do this again. I will not allow a Biden nomination to go through. I will not allow him to fill a vacancy. Wow. And he represents a minority position, everybody. Think about that. Think about it. Biden got 80 million votes. So I want to know, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? I mean, because it's just, to me, it's astounding. CK, excuse me, but you know what? This is power. And I think we need to really understand how power works, CK. He's playing the game. Now, I'm
He
not.
is playing the game. We need to play the game a little bit more. When I say we, I shouldn't say we. Democrats, I think, need to play the game a little bit more aggressively. Not a little bit, way more aggressively. And this is not a partisan issue per se. It's just it manifests itself this way. I think Chappelle made this point, and more. And she was very forthright about it. And on one of your shows recently, Santita. And I think the Republican Party, one thing I will say about them is they are a take no prisoners party. They may be they may not be concerned about rules of law and justice. That may be the case, some would argue. But when they have a goal, they set the goal, they look at the goal, and they do whatever it takes to get there. They're not interested in, debating and doing going through intellectual gyrations as to whether it should or should be. They just have their focus on the prize and they go after it. I don't think that's such a bad thing when it comes to where we are right now with the U.S. Senate and with voting rights violations and voter suppression all over the place. I think the Democrats could take a page from the Republican Party in terms of getting rid of voter suppression and the like and stopping at nothing to do it. And that's not to say that a lot of people aren't working very hard in the field. There are a lot of grassroots organizations, 501c3, that are nonpartisan, that are opposing voter suppression because they believe in the right to vote. That is not and should not be a partisan issue. But when we do have a senator like Mitch McConnell that's saying, I'm not going to allow, that should tell us that we have got to be laser focused on doing whatever it takes to strengthen the majority in the U.S. Senate, because that should not be permissible.
Well, I'm under 2 minutes. Should the court be expanded? Now there are growing calls to expand the court by 3 or 4 persons. Do you think is that feasible?
My personal view is that it should be expanded.
Why?
And this is the reason why. It wouldn't be the first time that the U.S. Supreme Court was expanded. There's a history of this, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think with the amount of cases that they have, with the issues that they see, they would do well to expand it, because you don't want to have a small group deciding on these critical issues involving our country and our citizens. If we have a broader base, that would allow for broader opinions, a more diverse group of people representing, in fact, this country, that would be able to sit in judgment. In the last administration, there were 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices that were nominated and appointed. And I think that there needs to be a broader base and more diversity amongst the candidates that are put forth for the U.S. Supreme Court. And the only way that that's going to happen, because these are appointments for life, is if it is opened up. And I think it's fair. I don't think that there's no reason why it shouldn't happen. There's a precedent for this that has been set, and I think that we should embrace it.
Attorney C.K. Hovler, everybody, the people's attorney, president of the National Bar Association, the largest and oldest black bar association in the world. More than 65,000 lawyers she represents, and she's also chair of Rainbow Push. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to keep our eyes peeled, because this is a big story, everybody. It's a big story. And you know what, CK? Coming up, we've got the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin. He's the president of the Cherokee Nation. He's going to talk to us about what happened in Canada, what happened in the United States, too. But they found 215 children in a mass grave at a relocation school. What is a relocation school? What is the point of relocation schools? Why has the Prime Minister of Canada seen fit to apologize? Why is the Canadian government calling upon the Pope to apologize and to have some compensation for these families? And guess what? It's not just 215 children. Thousands of Indigenous children in Canada were vanished, disappeared. They too are having a reckoning with the Indigenous community. Going to talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. Stay right there. Girl, I just when I think about it, my heart just breaks, CK.
Sorry, I turned you out. You can talk now. Should I also call?
Up to 25%.
Should I call him now, or should I wait till after
Call him at about 7, just after 7. And remember, just refer to him as Chief Hoskin. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, CK. I mean, it's heartbreaking when I think of these folks having their children forcibly taken from them.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm like, what is that?
No, it is. It is. And the Catholic Church should do something about it. When these priests were molesting children, the Catholic Church, as we know, has had to compensate for that because of litigation and other measures. Here, children were killed and thrown in. I mean, how did we get to a point where these children were in mass graves? They had to have been killed. Or that's what I'm saying. Mass graves of children. So yeah, this is there's a lot of reckoning.
Wait a minute.
There's a lot of reckoning in.
And it's thousands of them. It's thousands.
Yep.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yep.
I mean, it's thousands. It's thousands. Whoa, whoa, y'all. Hold on. What if it were your child? Because we talking America.
And you know,
yes, please. Yes.
And I know that we finished with Ketanji Brown Jackson, but she is someone to watch. She has taken some strong, very progressive positions on issues. She's not a corporatist. Now, she's not on everything, but she's handled some very, very, very tough cases. Cases on immigration. She did stand up to the Trump administration on various issues, and she wasn't afraid. So I think that's kind of now, I'm not saying, just like with any judge, some judges, they have opinions that you like and you don't like. But what I'm saying is she's not afraid to stand up. She's not afraid to speak. And I think that she's more progressive thinking than she is conservative. And she's addressed many issues, many, many issues, because when she was on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, a lot of matters came before her.
Well, you know what?
Very important and significant matters.
I want her to have the opportunity. And ideologically, I don't, I want people to be fair. I've seen some people who've been my ideological opposite, but in the name of fairness, they've done some really great things. And I've seen some people ideologically with whom I match up who, for a whole lot of reasons, went in another way. I just want you to be fair. Just be fair.
Right.
Be fair. Be fair.
She should be given a chance. I mean, her credentials are impeccable. Her judicial temperament cannot be challenged. I mean, these are the things that we look at. She's even-handed. She's fair. She looks at the evidence. I mean, can I just say I can't say that I agree with every single opinion that she's given, but I can't say I would agree to any judge's every single opinion. But on key issues, critical issues that would be important to many communities, she's been even-handed and level-handed.
Well,
so
it'll all be the point will be moot if she does not get the opportunity. And so we just have to, that's why people you need to get registered to vote. Everybody get registered to vote. You got to vote because she will not have a chance. She will not even be heard if Mitch McConnell becomes the majority leader. He just told you that, and he just gave Democrats a gift. He gave us a talking point, a point of action. What are you going to do? And even if you're not a Democrat, I can deal with that. But that ought to offend you. It's not fair. I mean, to my Republican brothers and sisters, that's not fair. It's not fair.
Yep.
That's not what you do.
Well, she just should be given a shot. I mean, she was confirmed, and it wasn't so close, 53 to 44. That's a pretty good vote. I mean, if you think about it, so she's a strong contender. She's a strong contender, and so.
No, I want that she's a strong contender, and I would say this.
All right, Principal Chief Hoskin is on.
Oh, you know what, CK? Before you go, let me introduce you to Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin, the Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. We're so honored to have him today.
Yes. Hello. How are you? I think we have met before, but
I think so, CK and Santita. It's good to be with you this morning.
I'm so honored that you're with us today. Thank you so much. I was telling CK about what you and I will be discussing, and she, of course, as you know, she is the president of the National Bar Association, which is the largest and oldest Black bar association. She's been working with the indigenous legal community as well. It's just stunning to think about these babies found in this mass grave. I just
and especially in Canada, if I heard that in the United States, it's stunning and it's disgraceful no matter where we would find these babies in these graves. But in Canada is typically a more robust melting pot than the U.S. and they have their challenges certainly, but our challenges are greater, just based on my experience in Canada. But this is something that they are really going to have to address, and they are addressing, I believe, head on. But the Catholic Church needs to step up to the plate. They need to step up to the plate.
Well, I'm just telling you. The story is so heartbreaking. Indeed, I was seeing that they're going to have a sacred healing ceremony at the site, and they need to. But I think that we all need to be concerned about this story, and it's our story, everybody. So I hope
it is our story.
Have a listen, with this principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, who is honoring us with his presence today, and because it's something that I want to put on your minds. There's too many people who. I just did a soul poll, Chief Hoskin, and they did not know about the story. I said, "You don't know what? How do you not know about this story?" I mean, because as soon as I heard it, and I've heard about this before, and we're not up yet, but we're about to come up. I've heard about this before, but well, it's another time. We're having all of these moments of reckoning everywhere, so. I've heard about this before, but it's just, we don't talk about the indigenous concerns or, the first grievous sin committed on these shores.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. I am Santita Jackson. We are on the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, WCPT in Chicago, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. And we have got a lot to talk about today. We are honored to have with us the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin. And as I look at the weather here in Chicago, which will be 72 degrees and sunny, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, 85 degrees. I just wanted to get right into this, everybody, because we're honored to have the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. He is, I guess, in our broader language, he's the president of the Cherokee Nation. And so we effectively have a head of state with us today. And we're so honored to have him. And I have to tell you, my heart breaks, because when I heard this story, sadly, it was believable. It's a horrible history, everybody. It's a horrible history where children had been forcibly removed from their parents. And we're going to have the chief talk to us about that. But they had a horrifying discovery. A mass grave of 215 children was found at a relocation school in Canada. And I want to know what a relocation school is. How did this happen? And what is the history of relocation schools? Let us start first with greeting Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin of the Cherokee Nation. Thank you so much. Blessings to you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Santita. It's good to be with you this morning.
What happened? Prime Minister Trudeau has offered an emotional apology. The Canadian government is calling on the Pope to not only to apologize, but to do something. What happened? 215 babies?
215, yeah, children, babies. What happened was the product of a Indian policy in Canada that's familiar to the United States. Those who have studied the history, which is to remove Indian children from their homes in an effort to, quote, civilize them. There was a supposed reformer in the United States in the late 19th century who phrased it as kill the Indian, save the man. In other words, remove indigenous people from their tribal communities, deny them their culture, and in some cases, and this was the case in Canada and the United States, literally beat the culture out of the children and their language out of them so they wouldn't engage in those practices. And that is what happened on this continent in the 19th century and into the 20th century. And it happened in Canada. It happened in the United States. This is a gruesome discovery, but it's part of a larger story about governments who believe through official policy that the problem with Indians were that they were Indians. And the problem with Native peoples is that they were Native peoples, and that to save them was to rip them from their families and their homes, and then to go about treating them in a brutal manner, which in this case resulted in the deaths of over 200 children who were buried away in a mass grave. It's hard to imagine that happening anytime in the last 200 years, but it happened. And I think the Canadian government, though, is doing the right thing in terms of facing it and wanting to engage in reconciliation. So it's a good step, at least.
So we're talking with Chief Chuck Hoskin, the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, about this gruesome, painful discovery at one of the relocation schools, which we've had in the United States, but this discovery was in Canada. 215 children in a mass grave. Take me back, Chief Hoskin. How were these children removed from their homes? Was it the law? I mean, did someone come and get them? What happened?
Well, it was the law. First of all, there was immense pressure put on indigenous communities, both legal pressure and economic pressure. I mean, I can tell you from the Cherokee Nation standpoint, we had less poverty when we were allowed to govern ourselves than when there was the pressure brought to bear from the United States and white settlers and federal Indian policy. I'm not an expert on Canadian First Nation history, other than to say I know enough to know that the pressures were similar. And so children, in some cases, who were deemed by local reformers as to be living in unfit homes, but they were living in homes that were in keeping with tradition of mixed families, extended families living in the same dwellings. But the outside reformers said, no, this is not good for the children. We've got to take them away. So in some cases, they were legally taken away by the imposition of the law of the more dominant society. Forcibly taken away, lured away in some cases in terms of the economic pressures and the pressures of poverty on indigenous families. In other words, your children can go get this education and be cared for. So it was a mix of those things that happened in Canada and in the United States that led to a large part of a generation of indigenous people, indigenous children, being taken from their homes. And this was a purposeful policy. I mean, the idea was they had tried to extinguish Native peoples by dispossession, taking them from their land, removal, other legal schemes to suppress Native governments so that the dominant culture could take over and take resources. When that did not sufficiently work, I have to say a very sinister but very clever plan to deny the next generation essentially an indigenous life. And it was very effective in the United States and effective in Canada, effective in the sense that it almost succeeded. It definitely is the reason that indigenous languages are endangered, cultures are endangered. But in this case, lives were lost, and I suspect that that's something we'll continue to discover across this continent.
Amen, because in this particular case, they found the remains of a child as young as 3 years of age. What happened at these schools? I mean, when you call yourself, not you, but when one calls oneself civilizing Or is that Europeanizing?
It is. It's the colonizing mindset that by some righteous power, by something handed down from on high, that this culture was the right culture, the dominant culture, and so kids would be brought in and receiving an education, but their hair would be cut because that was how people ought to look. Santita, we actually see that still happening today. This idea, I know we're talking about the loss of lives, but the denial of culture still happens today across cultures in terms of a dominant culture saying you have to cut your hair. But that happened at these schools. And the injury inflicted just through that act of cutting the hair of a young boy or young girl, more often a young boy because boys are supposed to have short hair, was sort of the initiation into this school, into these types of boarding schools. The denial of cultural practices that these young people had just grown up understanding was their life way, was another form of injury. And again, language being spoken, you can imagine this is a mix of indigenous people, so different languages are spoken, but imagine a little boy finding a little girl from a similar tribe or a common tribe and speaking their language, and just the joy they may have felt, and to physically have that beaten out of them. That happened at these boarding schools. And so it wasn't designed to be primarily this torture chamber, but it was informed by this European idea that their culture was the right culture, and that indigenous languages were bad and cultural practices bad, and to get the children to get in line, the disciplinary practices of the day were employed. And when children would die, in the case of this school in Canada, they were buried in a mass grave. But again, I suspect that we'll continue to discover those sorts of graves, and because across the continent there are children that just went unaccounted for, and that's, I think, what this discovery is about, is accounting for them.
Well, I mean, indeed, there is a New York Times report that said thousands of indigenous children vanished in Canada. How does a human being vanish? Matter can't be destroyed. I mean, how do you do that?
Well, that's true. And here is something else that I think we should think about, is that this is, people will call this a dark chapter in history, and that is a true statement. It's also a crime scene, and that's something that you could go across this continent and find different boarding schools and find evidence of the child that was, removed from their parents, removed from their tribal lands, and were unaccounted for in terms of their whereabouts. That's a crime scene. Our topic today is not the Tulsa race massacre, but I was thinking of that a couple of weeks ago in Tulsa, that we're remembering history as we should, but we were in the midst of of a crime scene. And then that's what has happened in Canada. They've discovered a crime scene, and there ought to be some accountability for that.
And people need to know that you were very active in the Tulsa commemorations. That's where I saw you. And given this, because this is not a new story to you, how did Tulsa resonate with you as a result of your own history?
It's very powerful in two respects. One, sort of in a personal sense, and the other as a tribal leader. The Tulsa Race Massacre happened on historic tribal lands. The Greenwood community in Tulsa is a community that was, its origins are rooted in both Cherokee Nation history and Creek history. Why? Because those were Creek and Cherokee tribal lands. So when President Biden came to Greenwood, he literally is coming to the Cherokee Nation. So we have this history with the community that developed there and flourished there until it was beaten down and literally burnt to the ground. On a personal level, though, this is a chapter of history that myself, like so many Oklahomans and so many Americans, is something that we grew up not familiar with. And to the extent that it was exposed, it's referred to for most of my lifetime as a riot, which invokes ideas of people, gathering in the street and protesting and then being put down for the sake of public safety. That's sort of the imagery that the dominant society likes to put into our minds through miseducation and misrepresentation of history. And so on a personal level, as I've grown up, it was very jarring for me to think about this happening, but also jarring to think about it not being taught and not being told. And I think there's a parallel with what happened with indigenous people, that these boarding schools, as you grow up, the larger society doesn't want to talk about it. It's an inconvenient truth. It's something that's a difficult conversation they'd rather not have. But I think we live in a time, Santita, in which we're forcing these conversations and we're forcing this reconciliation, and that is a good thing. But we've got a lot of work to do. I mean, in Canada, I think it was within the last decade, the Catholic Church was still not willing to take steps to apologize and atone for its role in the boarding school. I'm not saying that this is completely driven by the Catholic Church, but that's a major world institution that continued to essentially deny that part of its history. But I think that denial can only last for so long, for so many generations, and I'm glad we're living in a time when that's changing. And it was changing for me in Greenwood to see the commemoration, and it's changing for me when I read the New York Times article on this gruesome discovery, and I see the reaction from communities all over the world. That at least is encouraging.
Talking with Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin of the Cherokee Nation about this gruesome discovery. It's so painful. 215 children in a mass grave, one as young as 3 years of age, at the relocation schools where indigenous people were forced to send their children so that they could become civilized, Europeanized. What do you think about that, everybody? 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. I see on my timeline. Hey, Vanderlei down there in Brazil. See a lot of tears, a lot of people. It's like another trail of tears, if you will. I mean, it's not a pun. It's just a very real thing, Chief Hoskin. I mean, the New York Times called this a cultural, well, not someone in the article called this a cultural genocide. A cultural genocide. I mean, where the body survives, but the culture is taken out.
That is well put, because 215 lives lost is and should be the most important thing, because these are human lives lost. These are children lost. As I say, it's a crime scene. But the bigger, broader injury, let's just say the broader injury, because there's nothing bigger than the loss of human life. The broader injury is the annihilation of culture, or the attempted annihilation of culture. That was the goal of the policy of removing children from their tribal lands. The goal was to rid the planet, essentially, of those lifeways, of those languages that were deemed so foreign to the sensibilities and the cultural norms of the larger society that they had to be extinguished. Because, again, the exploitation of indigenous lands, the dispossession of natives from their lands and resources was done in a variety of ways. You mentioned the Trail of Tears. That's one of the most prominent examples that happened to my people. But that wasn't enough to destroy our lifeways and to rip our culture away, because our culture was starting to get in the way of the pressure of migration, of white settlers. We practiced the communal holding of lands. We we had a legal regime that wasn't quite in line with the American notions of how laws and governments should be structured. And that's true across this continent. And so to crush it, it wasn't enough to remove people. It wasn't enough to put our people on reservations. The next step was to deny an entire generation their culture and their language, in the hopes that eventually there'd be no tribes, that there'd be people left and they would integrate into society, and that everyone could go about their business. But that's the broader injury here, Santita. And it worked to some degree. We've had a great deal of loss of culture and language among Native peoples on this continent. So it was somewhat successful. Fortunately, First Nations in Canada are strong, getting stronger every day, and tribes in this country in the United States are strong and getting stronger every day.
And that is good news. I mean, because it's very interesting. I think you're right. It did work because a lot of indigenous people we know, or people who present themselves as indigenous, actually are white people. They look like white people. And, that's interesting. Black people were not able to do that. And those of us who did called ourselves passing. We kind of passed on out the race, if you could. But wow. I mean, well, that's, this is a really, really tough way to go. I mean, and people of color have had a really, really hard way to go in the Americas. This has been a tough experience for us from the North to the South. Where do we go from here? I mean, President Trudeau has offered an apology, and it appeared to be heartfelt because I'm sure he was horrified. What do you think the Catholic Church ought to do? What are the next steps for the Canadian government? I mean, because we have the issue here in the United States too.
Yeah, we do, and that's what we have to wrestle with as governments and as institutions and as churches is how do we truly make amends if we ever can. But of course, we believe in redemption. We believe that there can be reconciliation. I think, to me, it's important that governments and institutions acknowledge that crimes were committed, not just that this is a dark chapter and we're sorry. That's a good first step, and the Prime Minister of Canada issuing that heartfelt apology is a necessary step that in the United States for various dark chapters took far too long to happen for a lot of minorities in this country. But it is a good first step. But we also have to understand that this came at a price to Native peoples. That cost was borne in terms of a loss of language and culture. Those things are difficult to hang on to and to rebuild, and frankly, they take resources to rebuild. I mean, in Cherokee Nation, we're spending millions and millions of dollars to save our precious language, because if we don't do it now, it'll be gone forever. That's true of indigenous peoples all over this country in terms of the danger of the language. Many of them lack the resources, and I think governments in the Catholic Church and others responsible have to acknowledge that there has been identifiable injury done here to individuals, to families, to the extent that we can ever trace these bodies to families. There was injury, and there's injury to tribal peoples in terms of language and culture that will cost them resources to hang on to and rebuild. You hate to reduce things to a dollar amount because it diminishes the immeasurable suffering that happened. But at some point, governments that apologize and institutions that apologize have to understand that there's real identifiable injury here, that these are crimes, and there has to be some accountability. That takes a variety of forms. So it's got to be more than an apology, Cynthia.
It's got to be more. It's got to be more. I've got about 30 seconds. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, I think that as the world does from time to time, when they read a story about a dark and tragic chapter with an indigenous community, hearts go out genuinely to Native peoples, and they start to study a bit more. In this case, what happened with boarding schools on this continent, that is a positive thing. What I would encourage people to do is what you have done and what Reverend Jackson has done is that you've explored what's going on today. And First Nations in Canada are doing amazing things. In fact, if you Google the name of the tribe that was connected with this boarding school, one of the first things you see is a housing project they're working on. There are great things that tribes are doing today that are in spite of the great odds that were against them, and that's reason to celebrate with them. So cry with them, be sorrowful with them, but also celebrate with them and celebrate with us. And we always love to have you back in the Cherokee Nation, Santita.
Well, I can't wait to get back. I had a beautiful time. It was a tough time, but it sure was great seeing you and Kim TV. Now we just have to get her seated in Congress.
That's right.
Come on. I beat that tambourine every time I see you. Ken T.
We appreciate it.
Congress, sending you much love.
That's right.
Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin, we are honored to have you today. Coming up, John Nichols, everybody. Back in just a minute. Chief Hoskin? Okay.
One thing. Okay, I guess Chief Hoskins dropped, but Anita from NC, should I tell her to call back? She said she could call back later, or
No, because I'm going to be going off at the top. But I wanted her to hold because I want to get her. I'm going to get her comment at the top.
okay. And I'll call John Nichols right now.
Thank you so much. Whew. Everybody, that was a lot, wasn't it? But this is a story that we need to know. Well, Daryl, you said some white people are still not wanting to be accountable or take responsibility for how they've treated and are currently treating people of color. I hear you. But you know what? Robert said my mic is going in and out. We're going to look at that. Yes. It's a lot. It's a lot. But some people, there's some black folks who don't want to have this discussion. Really. Bottom line, if you believe, what do they sing? The song, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." And if you believe in justice and fairness, you cannot rest. And that's odorless and colorless. We just have to decide that, just like what they call it, critical race theory. I hear you. Just tell the true history. And guess what? Truth crushed to the earth. Those bodies that were crushed to the earth, they've risen again. Isn't that what we've been told? Truth crushed to the earth. They crushed those bodies under the earth. But oh, praise be to God. Guess what?
Mr. Nichols is on.
Thank you. They have risen. Their spirits have risen. Radar technology, they found, and they're going to find more. But that's what we found out in Tulsa. In fact, they have covered the bodies of so many people. There's a big field that's next to the historic Vernon AME Church. This is John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park. They found a lot of bodies there. Their bodies all over the Greenwood section of that are buried deep, deep, deep in the Greenwood section today. And there's a highway that covers, many people believe, a lot of bodies. Tell you what, you got to make things right. John Nichols, how are you?
I am very well, my dear. How are you?
Doing great. We just had a great conversation with Chief Hoskin of the Cherokee Nation. Oh boy, that was
you had mentioned you were going to talk with him.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot because well, they say truth crushed to the earth will rise again. Well, these babies have spoken. 215 of them at least in one location, and so people are calling on the Catholic Church to take ownership, because this happened at a church that was run at a school that was run by the Catholic Church, because that's what the Catholic Church will do. They will run schools for you, and we need to know what happened. And now there are a lot of forensic pathology finds that many African American slaves. There's some interference that we're hearing with you, John. Is there something in the background?
Not on my end, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, no, I was hearing something. But many slaves.
Let me move to another room.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Many slaves were literally worked to death. Dr. Joy DeGree Leary, who talks about the post-traumatic slave syndrome, there is physical evidence that slaves were literally worked to death. When you examine the bones, when you see the tendons snapped, women would have babies and would literally have the baby, and they'd be ordered back into the fields like an hour or so.
Oh, yeah.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Determined, unstoppable, achieving the impossible. We're standing tall with our heads held high. We are victorious.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson show, June 15th, 2021. What was I doing some years ago, June 15th? Ah, I was graduating from high school. Whitney Young in the house, everybody. Whitney Young Magnet High School here in Chicago. We love Chicago Public Schools. I am a product of the public school system. Everybody, it's 7:30, so you know what it means. Well, it's actually 7:34, but at the bottom of the hour every Tuesday, we have John Nichols, the national correspondent for The Nation magazine, brilliant author, brilliant columnist, pundit. And we've been having a conversation. When I spoke with him yesterday, we were talking about this conversation that we were both anticipating that I would have with the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. And it kind of dovetails into what we were talking about yesterday and what he wants to talk about today, which is something that he's written about. Florida has banned so-called, what is this? This really telling the truth. I stumble over it because to me, it's about telling the truth. You can call it critical race theory. I got it. But it's about if you don't write about slavery, if you don't write about Jim Crow, if you don't write about the relocation schools for the indigenous people in the United States and Canada, if you don't tell all of those stories, you're missing that's not you're writing fiction. You're not telling history. We're living with it every day. And he's written a brilliant piece. Florida's Ron DeSantis wants to cancel education about systemic racism, and really he wants to cancel the truth. And so, this really dovetails into what we were talking about. You can't do that because it's not just racism, it's just classism. It is racism at the core of it, but classism is a real deal, and we want to act like we're not classist in America, as if we're not misogynistic, racist. All that we are. It doesn't mean that I don't love my country, but I know where we're sick and where we have to get well. I've got some callers who, and I want you to hear what they have to say, and I want you to because I know you can bridge the conversation we just had into the conversation that we're having, because it's the same conversation essentially, John. Renee Criswell, I think that's you, Renee.
Yes, yes, it is. Hello, and thanks for taking my call.
Well, I know you were fired up about this. I know you had to call because, John, Renee is a teacher. Sometimes I know when Renee's going to call. She never calls. But something like this will infuriate her. I think it's because it's history, something that she wants to teach in school. Renee, what's on your mind? What did you think about Chief Hoskin and what he had to say in this story?
Okay, and first I want to say, Santita, that some of those natives who present as white might actually be white, because remember, for $5 you could get up on the rolls, so you could take advantage of some of the treaties that they've had for the Native Americans, and at the same time they wouldn't let the Black people who had Native heritage get on those rolls. But you know what? I just wanted to say that it's a shame that they did to them the same thing they did to the Africans who were enslaved here. Forced them not to be able to use their languages anymore, stripped them of their cultures, because that also stripped us as a country. It stripped humanity from being able to learn about some of the ancient remedies that they had for healing medicines, healing herbs. It stripped us from knowing about, their cultures, and we could have been even greater. I mean, we wouldn't have all this air pollution and stuff if we had followed the traditions that the people who are already here were following. And it's a shame that they abused them, not just in the United States, not just in Canada, but I mean, that's happened to natives in Australia. They were put in schools and sexually abused by the people running the schools. The history is dark, and I'm glad that people are starting to learn about it. And there's a movie that if anybody wants to check it out, it's called The Education of Little Tree, and it takes place in the United States, and it shows a little Native American boy, a little Cherokee boy, forced into one of the schools to be stripped of his culture. And it's like 20 years old, maybe 30 years old. I showed it to my children when they were growing up, and to my children. Well,
what is the name of it, Renee?
Of The Education of Little Tree.
Let me ask you this: as a teacher, how does this impact learning? What can you imagine what those children were going through at that school and at these other relocation schools? You've been forced away from your parents, and your culture is ripped from you. How how
So,
can you
you're,
how do you teach children? Are you teaching them or are you indoctrinating them? Because it sounds like it's an abusive
they were
situation.
indoctrinating them. They weren't trying to educate them. I'm sorry. I'm in the car, Santita, so I can't hear really well.
No, that's okay. I mean, because
But
it
no,
sounds like
they,
it's an abusive situation, Renee. Renee?
I can't hear.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no worries. Your thoughts about this?
Okay. Now, the last part I heard was when you said, were they indoctrinating them or teaching them?
Yes.
Okay, so they definitely weren't trying to educate them. They were trying to, except for educating them in how to not be themselves. And can you imagine how one feels when they can't be who they really are? And when you strip people of the languages that they have where they can't just communicate the way they want to communicate with others, and then you strip them and you it's like a death. To me, it feels like a death of self, a death of part of self, and it's not good. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling, and
No, you're not. I mean, because I think that's
thanks
the
for
fight.
taking my.
No, thank you. Because no, it's not. Because it's very painful. That's why John Nichols is here today. And John, you are concerned about Governor DeSantis canceling education, as you said, about systemic racism. Why do you think it's important, A, to include that in the curriculum?
Well, I think this is where I think we see the bridge in all this, because specifically shut down teaching that he suggests is influenced by critical race theory, which simply says that to have a full picture of American history, you have to take in the reality of that this country accepted and, in fact, enforced slavery. That when slavery ended, then it moved to a system of Jim Crow segregation that included lynching, that included night riders, that was incredibly violent, and that did not just occur in the South, but also in parts of the North. And then when you finally got a civil rights, you continued to have structural racism, not just in our politics, but also in our economics. That's not a debatable point. That is a reality of our history. And yet, not just deny that, but also to punish those who seek to teach it. Now, why that becomes important is beyond just the baseline that we're talking about here. Areas. Don't doubt for a
One
second.
second. Dylan, his phone continues to go out. Okay, go on, John.
Sure.
Okay.
So it will spread to other areas because
with your phone today. Oh boy.
I can hear you.
No, we'll continue because just every few
okay.
minutes it's intermittent.
Yeah, it's odd. Yeah, it shut. And then then Dylan called back, which was great. So the important thing to understand here, though, is that in addition to about systemic racism, what DeSantis and others will do is that they will also bar teaching about the oppression of Native Americans. They don't like the use of the word genocide to speak about what happened. Will also bar teaching ultimately about labor unions and about battles against economic oppression. This is really a part of a broad effort to rewrite American history in a way that to those who have practiced oppressive tactics politically and economically throughout that history and who seek to continue to do so. This isn't a fight about history. It's an effort to make sure that the present isn't influenced by it.
Hold on 1 second. Dylan, let's find out what's going on with John Nichols' phone. I'll go to Anita and while we work that out, because you keep clipping out on vital parts of what you're saying, and I don't want the audience to miss that. But there's a clicking sound. It's a clicking sound that we're hearing. You might not be hearing it, but we're hearing it. Dylan, would you pull up Anita, please?
She's up.
Thank you. Anita? Okay, I can't hear Anita. Perhaps she can hear me. Please bring up Anita. Anita?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. I deal with the racism. I know as African American, it doesn't bother me. What bothers me is there's some people's families who fall into that where they actually take on that as a learning for their family. Maybe their parents are at work and the parent doesn't know how to teach the child, and the child is actually learning a culture outside of his family or her family that's not being taught in her home or even respected of her culture and or his culture. And then when they grow up, you know, they don't like their own family because they're being taught that this culture that they're being taught is better than what they have in their home, because it is supposed to be education and it is supposed to be better. And the culture that's being taught, according to my religion, is not a safe culture because it teaches to break up family ties and allow people to live without the blood ties being respected. And then the kids have no foundation. It also institutionalizes children so that women can go to work, and then the children aren't being taught anything in their own homes, and they're picking up all this institution thinking of the races, which is whatever crazy they come up with as far as family bonds. I mean, you can't rape a woman and then leave her with nobody to take care of her children and then say that she's a family. And I mean, it's just real, it's real crazy, or keep people out of an economic situation where they can't take care of themselves, and then teaching the institution that these people are impoverished. They're not impoverished, they're oppressed. So it's actually not telling the truth.
Anita, to your point, because you've raised a beautiful family to maturity, and they're all very bright, well-educated kids. Do you think it's important to teach the whole of American history, the whole of world history in these schools, or do you think they should go to special schools for that? Like I remember the Nation of Islam, they started a school. It was named after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's wife, the Clara Muhammad School, Sister Clara's School. Do you think that's important too?
Well, my kid's father actually attended the Nation of Islam schools and graduated with Elijah Muhammad right there in Chicago in 8th grade and high school. Yes, yes. So I'm very familiar with that, and it was very necessary because after, you know, we were supposedly free of slavery, we were not free to know how to have a family because we never had family before. And so if you have a parent that's, you know, not knowing how a family is supposed to come together, you're going to stay impoverished, right? Then we're learning from people who I personally think the Caucasian does not know what a family is. I would never want to learn what a family is.
No, well, let me say this. I can't say that. No, because I know I have some.
Well, I can.
Well, I hear you. We just disagree, and
Mhm.
because I know
Mhm.
some good solid people in every race
Mhm.
who have
Right.
families, who want families, and they will fight for you to have yours. But I think there is
Oh, okay.
well, I'm just saying that there is a corruption in our society,
Mhm.
and we have to deal with that. We have genocided
So
people.
Santita,
We have done that, and I know I have to stop you there because that is, I'm not going to do that. I've
Mhm.
seen some people do. I've seen some people behave nobly, of every race, and I've seen some people do bad things in every race. But I know that we are living in a
Mhm.
white supremacist system, and we have to be honest about that, and we have to deal with that, and we have to talk about that.
I want to
Can I
find
say
out.
one more thing?
Well, you can say it, but say it very quickly because now I have John Nichols back. Yes, Anita.
Your dad was saying, giving the statistics, or someone was giving some statistics about children who end up that don't have parents that end up in the criminal justice system. And most of the criminal justice system comes from people who did not have parents growing up with an adoption system. So that's saying if the white community is running these government systems and making the laws and rules, why aren't these children able to become successful adults and being
because you
family?
you have some parents who are not conscientious now, or they don't have the supports. Both of my parents were born to single moms who were teenagers. My mother's mother was orphaned at 12 and had her first child at 14, and then she had a couple more children. And then you know what she did? She got married at 18. She broke the cycle of instability, and she got all of her children through college. And then she went and got a degree herself at 61. So at some point we
But
can
these
have
children,
we can have another conversation because I'm not going to buy into
Mhm.
if you got a single parent that you can't make it. That's not true. We have a value
Well,
system. We have a value system that's been corrupted. Because guess what? Dylan Roof and the boys who shot up everybody at Columbine came from so-called good homes. They had both parents. What's the deal? Either your values are right or they're not. So that's where I am. I love you, Anita. I'm gonna have to move on to John. John Nichols. Okay, because I wanted to get you back in because we didn't. We were having a hard time listening to you. But my point with you is, why do we need to hear about racism? You were saying that if you shut down on racism, you're not going to talk about unions. You're not going to talk about indigenous people. You're not going to talk about women. You're not going to talk about these class struggles that we have.
Well, first and foremost, it's vital to talk about racism. I mean, and this is an underpinning reality of the American experience that we can't deny. We have to recognize this country allowed slavery. This country then, when slavery ended, permitted segregation, Jim Crow segregation, discrimination, lynching, night riders, and when finally we passed the Civil Rights Act, we passed a Voting Rights Act, we amended the Constitution to get rid of the poll tax, then we started to see all sorts of interventions as regards voter suppression and new forms of economic and political discrimination. And so if we don't talk about that, just as in that simple way that I just did, in a realistic way that acknowledges that's a part of our history, a huge part of our history, and that it influences our present, it becomes incredibly hard to change things. It's incredibly hard to progress because we don't acknowledge what shaped where we're at today. And we should not for a second imagine that those who would shut down teaching as regards systemic racism won't move quickly to also shut down teaching about genocide as regards Native Americans, won't move quickly to shut down teaching about the suppression of unions and the impact of economic discrimination and economic intolerance. And so the bottom line is that we ought to have a united front in support of teaching the real history of the United States. And the interesting thing about it, Santita, is that when we teach the real history of the United States, it doesn't disempower us. It doesn't make us sad or frustrated. It actually makes us stronger because in teaching the real history of the United States, the full history of oppression and discrimination, we also teach of the struggles that overcame so many of these barriers. And it's the full history that teaches people what is possible to struggle against, what is possible to overcome. And I think in the end, that's what people like Ron DeSantis and other politicians fear the most. They fear that young people today, learning the whole history of the United States, including those very painful and very difficult parts of our past, will also learn that you can overcome great barriers. And so I think this isn't just about history at all. I think what we're talking about is an effort to prevent, knowledge and activism in this time that might really change this country for the better.
Well, where do we go from here? I mean, because we are in this fight, John, to
it, they say truth crushed to the earth will rise again. And as much as even though they tried to tamp down these bodies of these babies, they have risen from this unmarked grave and they're crying out. That is what we saw in Tulsa. That's what we're seeing in Tulsa. They're looking for the bodies there. And many of the Tulsans, the black Tulsans, say the overpass, the highway that divides white Tulsa from black Tulsa today, underneath, they say their bodies. There were bodies everywhere. Because remember, we're just a couple of generations out from that massacre, really. Some people grew
We
up
still
with their
have people
grandmothers.
alive.
Yeah, 3 of
We
them.
still have people alive from that period.
And 20 years ago, there were more people alive than 20 years before that. So this is not far away. This is not far away. And the indigenous relocation schools, we had them in the United States. Help me to understand the resistance to telling the whole history of the United States. I mean, and I say this to you respectfully. You know you're my brother. I love you. I've known you a long, long time. Help me to understand as a white person, because you're privy to some conversations I'm not privy to. What is the resistance? What is it?
No, I think it's people fearing losing power. I think that there is, I strongly believe, and you see this in our politics, I strongly believe that there are political and economic players and forces in this country who are very well positioned. They have benefited tremendously, not just over generations, but over centuries. And now they have come to their positions of power as governors, as senators, as CEOs of corporations. And they look at a teaching of the whole history of the United States, and what they recognize is that it is a teaching that points to people in power and says, in our history, at the founding moment, at critical junctures throughout that history, powerful people did the wrong thing. They didn't just do something that was, politically inappropriate. They did things that were deadly, that were horrific, that were brutally destructive. And they forced circumstances where people had to rise up in a civil war, in nonviolent civil disobedience, in protests, throughout the history of this country. And when we teach that whole history, then powerful people become vulnerable in two ways. Number one, people start to recognize that many of the folks who are held up as heroes actually were not that heroic. And people also start to think of other heroes, of a people's history, where folks at the grassroots are actually the true heroes. People who, abolitionists and civil rights campaigners and indigenous rights campaigners and suffragettes and so many people throughout our history who said, well, this country isn't a perfect union, right? We need to make it a more perfect union. We need to change this country. And I think powerful people fear that sort of thinking, that sort of understanding will threaten them today. So I think that's why the history becomes so powerful.
I've got about 30 seconds. Our dear friend, Ned Beatty, made his transition a couple of years ago. 30 seconds. Ned Beatty. Many people were shocked that he was traveling with us in 1988.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is important to understand. And this is throughout history. There have always been righteous folks, and there have been folks who've stood up when they were in positions of power and said, I want to be part of the change. And Ned Beatty, really a very peak moment in his career when he was very recognizable, joined with the Reverend Jesse Jackson in 1988 in California, campaigned with Reverend Jackson, and there are wonderful photos from that moment in 1988 that show what politics can and should be. And Ned Beatty has, as you say, transitioned. But we need to remember he was not just a great actor. He had some pretty good politics.
He's a really great guy. I just said, very quickly, I got about 15 seconds before I get out of here. When I saw him walking on the bus, I was in the back of our, the campaign bus. And he bounded onto the bus. I was like, wait a minute. I know this is California.
I know that guy.
I said, Ned Beatty? Oh, not that guy. That was Ned Beatty. Are you kidding me? And he was very excited to be with us. And I just, God bless him. What a great human being. What a great artist.
God bless you, my baby. Love you, John Nichols. Thank you, Dylan,
Love you, just
everybody. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. All right, everybody. I love you, love you, love you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Boy, oh boy. You
yeah,
have
we had a little struggle with the phone. I don't know what was going on there, but whatever it was, we'll get it sorted out.
It's you know what? It's just stuff.
It is just stuff.
It's just
But
stuff.
I'm so glad we talked about this subject because this is really vital. I think what they're doing with attacking critical race theory, they're trying to create a new demon, if you will.
Of course.
And it's very politicized. We know that, but it's also very dangerous because they, especially if a few states like Florida and Texas start to really ban this stuff, that's going to lead to the rewriting of textbooks.
First of all, they've already written the textbooks wrong. So I mean, coming up with another name for it, I get it. But the thing is, anything what we have read and what we have come to understand is history has been fiction. And I'm so grateful that I've had my mom, okay, because my mother told us about Tulsa. My mother told me, no, Lincoln wasn't in love with black people. And I heard this. We were coming. I was barely out of kindergarten. I must have been in first grade. I was very, very young because we were still in our apartment. And my mother said, now, let me tell you something about President Lincoln. You're going to be off from school, not because he loved black people. He was trying to save the Union first. And as time went on, and she had to set my brain in that, so that, and then as I got older, she gave me a more nuanced explanation. But by that time, I could really read, because very, very early on, I was reading everything, and we would have these kinds of discussions. And so, no, Christopher Columbus never got here. No, you can't discover a place that where people were already living. Everybody, you've got to tell your own children, and you've got to tell your own story, and you've got to write your own books, because the books that we have right now, John, are full of lies.
Mm-hmm. Although I will tell you something. Yes. This is the interesting thing. Having watched Whitman go through the schools in Madison, what I've found is that there has been some improvement. Right? We have seen some progress, and a new generation of teachers, people who really are like your mom, conscious and telling young people a fuller, better history of this country. What's happening now is a reaction against what minimal progress we've made. And this becomes, I mean, it's just a shocking thing that's going on in Florida. They are literally, threatening teachers. They're saying, you can't teach this. They are also saying, DeSantis has actually said that if school board members at the local level say, yeah, we want to teach, a full history, we want to really have a good curriculum here, that he will personally, as governor, come in and campaign against them.
And
in their own election.
They should let him do it. And I tell you what,
I think so.
A lot of what I did, and people have to push against that at the local board level. They're going to have to march. They're going to have to fight. They're going to have to organize, and then you march. Marching is a byproduct of organizing, analyzing, educating, agitating. Marching is just one little thing that you do. Trust me. Everybody, look. We have a lot of work to do in your churches, and with all these teachers and with all of these historians that you have inside of these churches. You need to be teaching your children. And you need to set up a curriculum where, just like Sunday school, where our children go to these churches and our sororities and fraternities and the Ys and the youth centers. We need to open these places up, and you need to have classes so our children can learn their history. And I don't mean I'm saying all of our children, because all American children, all people are diminished when you don't tell the whole truth, John.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 3/5 human, somebody's 7/5 human, because I lost my 2/5. That's crazy.
You have
Well,
to understand how we got here. How we got here. You need to tell the truth. Columbus never came to the United States. He got stuck in the Caribbean. This is an explorer
he got lost,
who got
and he got lost.
lost. Come
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
come on.
He thought he was in India.
And he renamed a
You
whole
know.
people, and we bought into it. Like what?
Well, and the way that when I teach and talk about the United States, the thing I always begin with a basic construct from from 1789, 1790, and that so-called founding moment after the Constitution was written. And we had your first elections, and I always remind people of who could vote in those first elections.
And who were they?
Now,
John?
obviously, well, slaves couldn't vote,
No,
of course.
Who could? Who
Indentured
were the people who could
servants.
vote? There you go.
Let's build let's work our way the other direction there. Let's talk about who couldn't vote.
Okay.
Slaves couldn't vote. Indentured servants couldn't vote. People who didn't own property couldn't vote. People who were members, at least in some states, of so-called dissenting religions, that meant other than mainstream Protestant, they couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. We start to add up all the people that couldn't vote. Historians tell us we get down to like maybe 6, even 5% of the population. That's who could vote. Wealthy, white, male property holders.
Property.
The rich people. That's who could vote. And once we understand that, right, we should also understand that if we don't teach that, if we don't teach the whole history, that at the founding of the American experiment, the intention wasn't for democracy. The intention was for a small elite to make decisions, and everybody else would be a spectator. Then we lose sight of everything that happened afterward, because what happened afterward was that great masses of people rose up and demanded that they be allowed to be more than spectators, that they be allowed to be at the table making decisions. And the struggle for the right to vote, I mean, it involved Catholics saying, yeah, we want the right to vote, and Jews saying, we want the right to vote, and people who didn't own property saying, we want the right to vote, and African-American men saying, we want the right to vote, and then women looking at that and saying, we want the right to vote, and Native Americans. Remember, after women got the vote, that's when they started to talk about letting Native Americans vote in U.S. elections. This isn't 19th century. This is in the 20th century, saying, well, Native Americans, we want the right to vote. Latinx people, especially in Texas and Florida, saying we want the right to vote. This is a very, very long story of people demanding a place at the table. And if we don't tell that whole story, and we don't recognize that nothing was given, everything was demanded, and in many cases there were successes. But if we don't understand that it wasn't some sort of natural evolution. This was an intense struggle over centuries. Then we can't possibly understand how we might make things right today, right? Because what that tells us is if we want to make things right, we have to continue to struggle.
You know what? I had a professor in college. I'll be forever grateful to Dr. Sashure. He was my Cal 1 teacher. And he would have these written definitions. And if you missed a comma or a semicolon, he would dock you. I mean, these are written definitions for Calculus 1. And we had to use, I just started using the old Fortran computer sheets.
Oh, yeah.
Because you had to write out every step of the equation. I mean, after the equation, every step of the resolution process you had to write. And you would get docked if you missed anything. And you were like, Dr. Sashure, but I got the right answer. He said, but how did you get the right answer? How did you get here? I'll never, ever forget that, because I was struggling to get a B in that class. And I took the exams for the other teacher just who preceded me. Because I was like, this guy, this man, like what? I wanted to test myself. I've been like that. And I'm like almost sailing through this other class, right? Not sailing through, but I'm like, I got a solid A in this other class, but I was just auditing. But I ended up getting a B from this guy. And it was one that I sweated for. I mean, but he made sure that you had to come to him. You had to go through the whole process. He said every little thing matters. How you got here. Oh, can I get an amen, John? How you got here matters to me, Santita, as much as that you got here. He said, I'd appreciate if you got to the wrong place if I felt your process was right. But if your process is off, eventually you're going to go wrong. I'm here to help train your mind, Santita. Dr. Ashbury sat up in his office and told me that. I want you to think correctly. There is a process here, and you need to respect it. And that was the end of that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny you say that because, A, that's a perfect analogy for what we're talking about, right? It is that we don't look at one incident in our history to understand it. We look for patterns. Yes. We look for behaviors that repeat. And once we identify them, right, then we say, well, wow, it sounds like we've got systemic racism. It's not one bad guy at one moment. It's something repeating again and again and again and being reinforced and being, redone in another form with another name, but still the same reality. Well, once we understand that, then we recognize that it's not just looking back at history and saying, oh, well, that's a bad guy. No, it's looking at the whole thing and looking at our current moment and saying, wow, our laws, our structures are a product of all that history. So what we live under today, even if the bad guy is long in the past, what we live under today is still influenced by what was. And so recognizing those patterns, recognizing those repeated behaviors, that's what makes history powerful. And it's like your great professor taught you. You figure out the process, then you figure out, how to answer the questions, how to get to the heart of it. And I can tell you, this is not a harm to America to understand this. This is a benefit to America. It is good for America to know its whole history. A country doesn't fall apart if it knows that it was flawed in the past, if it knows it still has flaws. A country can be made dramatically better by understanding the history of those flaws, and frankly, by understanding that we can address the flaws in the current moment. That's what makes us. I mean, it seems to me it is so logical that it is jaw-dropping that we now have a movement in our country, a strong movement, getting stronger, to deny our history. And it is associated with a political party. Obviously, not all Republicans are on board for this, but it's becoming a very dominant reality. I expect the next Republican platform will have condemnations of teaching critical race theory, of teaching about systemic racism. I expect that will be the case. I mean, certainly the rising political figures in the Republican Party, people like Ron DeSantis in Florida, are embracing this line. And so we're going to have a battle over history. It's going to be a fight. And we better win it. Because if we don't win it, then we run the real danger of becoming a place where our children are not taught that they can make a more perfect union.
Absolutely.
And that lie will ultimately haunt us at every level. Well, not just on issues of race, but on every issue.
The country won't survive it.
I agree.
We just won't survive it. And that's why, critical race theory, I appreciate the term, but for me, it's more basic than that. It is, because that belongs to me, that belongs in the halls of academia, and that's where, and it should be there. This is about telling history. And when you tell history, you just tell the truth. Otherwise, it's fiction.
As best you can.
Otherwise, it's fiction. It's
that's
not,
right.
History is truth.
Okay. Otherwise, you're not telling history. You're telling a story, not his story.
And
So,
and the cool thing about history is that we keep learning more.
absolutely.
Like, what are we learning? We're learning about Tulsa now. Not everybody. Some people already knew, but a lot more people are learning. Right? We're developing more and more knowledge because we dig deeper. We find out things. We go back and we look at the papers. We look at the records. We interview the elders who still remember some elements of things. And so the genius of history is that if we're serious about it, if we want to pursue the truth, we keep getting better. We keep learning more and more. We keep going deeper. And that depth is what ultimately gets us to truth, right? It's a constant pursuit of truth. And so in a sense, what we're seeing now with the people who want to shut down teaching about systemic racism, want to shut down teaching about so many of these issues, is it isn't simply that they are lying about the past. It is that they want to prevent us from pursuing the truth. They want to create a circumstance where we'll say, nope, history is written in a certain way, and you can't question that. And if you start to get in a situation where you can't question history, then I guarantee you that will extend into the present, and you will be told that you can't question the present. You can't question what exists today. And that's where we really shut down not just dialogue, you start to shut down democracy itself.
Well, and our furtive attempts at moving toward democracy. I mean, the fact is, you know what, John? The goodness and genius of God is that God doesn't give you information until you're ready to handle it anyway.
Truth.
We were not
Truth.
ready for Tulsa, really, on a mass scale, even 2 years ago. Even though you've had movies and books about it, we were not ready for these indigenous children to reach up out of the grave. Now, we're all having a moment of reckoning in our homes, in the streets, in the suites, everywhere. Now they're even talking about UFOs. We've always known that they've existed. There's other life out there. You know that. But
it has to be.
Oh, come on, please. It's arrogant of us to believe that we're it. Get out of here. Just stop. So the thing is, now we are maturing and we're in a space where we can take the information. Now let us grow up and get this information. And you know what? Hey, if they don't want to teach it in the schools, I'm telling you, you need to teach it in your churches. We need to just counteract this. Because a lot of my Black history, I learned my Black history and my American history, my indigenous history. I learned it first from my mom and my dad. And my mother was the on-site parent because my father was on the road working. So my mother was the one who said, there are 7 continents. And she pulled out the globe and we were in the sitting room. I will never forget it. She said, and you know what? And as she went through the whole thing, and John, I wasn't 10. So that meant my brother Yusuf was a toddler. Jesse, Johnny, and I were 8 and 9. She said, now, these are waterways. Now, the world fights over water.
Yeah.
She said, not gold, not oil, water. Water is that which you cannot live without. And she would go, my mother's also she's a brilliant woman. But you have to teach your own children. Don't give your children over to someone, particularly someone who does not like your child, to shape your child. Don't do it. Maybe that's a show we need to do. Who are you handing your child over to? Huh?
Well, we should think about it. And we should also recognize that there are great traditions of people's history, of people teaching history.
Yes.
And I think we as a society sometimes disrespect that. We don't recognize that happens all the time.
That's right.
Where an elder who's a good storyteller, and remember, being a good teacher of history, especially for younger kids, involves being able to tell a story well, to find the drama in it, to find the humanity in it, and we've all had that in our communities, right? I mean, So much of what I know about our history as a country came from meeting people who told me they're part of that history, right?
Absolutely.
And slowly but surely we piece it all together. Just think of Jack O'Dell,
Oh.
right? And for anybody who's, if we're Facebooking still here,
We are.
most people, not everybody may know Jack O'Dell, but Jack O'Dell was somebody who bridged the history of this country right up until recent years. He just passed not that long ago. And yeah, and Jack O'Dell goes back to the struggles of the 1940s, the 30s and the 40s.
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, he was our international affairs director at Operation Push. And
That's right.
This is before the rainbow. And although we embraced everybody at Operation Push because it's people united to serve humanity. But he was the person who, by name, President Kennedy told Dr. King that you have to get him off your staff.
That's right. That's right.
When Dr. King met with him, there were two people he said you got to distance yourself from. Jack O'Dell has to be fired. Okay, so fewer than 10 years later, my father had hired him, and he was shaping our international affairs division. And so much of what what you saw Reverend campaign on, that was Jack O'Dell.
Yeah.
His international affairs. So much of my understanding of the world, Jack O'Dell. And I think about my brother Jonathan has been much more sensitive to it, I must admit, than I. He said, I think about our grandfather Noah, our father's biological father, and all that he told us about his Native American ancestry. He said, kind of went in one ear, went out the other. Because also, I think as Black people, I know we are protective of our Black heritage because so many of us want to be everything but that. But his Native American heritage was a real part of him. It was like a fourth of him. So he grew up with a grandmother and a grandfather who were Native Americans, who had survived the Trail of Tears. So those were not just academic stories. Those were his family stories. The reason we're in Greenville and Easley, Santita, is because of this, because they ran my people, not just the Black people, but my mama. My Native American mama, they ran her out. That's why we ended up here. We found refuge and we created a community. You got to tell all those stories because all those stories, John, I want you to give the final word here. They make us who we are, this wonderful group of people called Americans and this global community, our global family. All of this makes us everything. Albertina Walker, those of you, Stanley Davis, Effie Rolfe, you know who I'm talking about, the queen of gospel music. She said years ago, and I'll never forget it, she said, I thank God for your every hurt and your every happiness because they've all made you who you are. And she said that at a particularly painful point in my life, a painful moment. And I'll never forget that, John. Because everything, the American Revolution and the Civil Rights Revolution, that's made us who we are, all of them. Thomas Jefferson and his Black family and his white family too, they made him who he was. We're all of those things, everybody. John, we're all of it. You can't cherry pick who you are. You really can't.
Yeah. And also, that's a very good point, Santita. It's a really vital point. That teaching the whole history of this country, the most difficult parts as well as the positive parts, teaching it all, at the end of the day, it will make us more humane. It will make us more understanding because we will recognize that we all have our flaws, right? And we will recognize that instead of being a story of perfect heroes who do everything right and who can never be questioned, what we'll recognize is that, George Washington owned slaves, right? Thomas Jefferson owned slaves.
Yes.
And So if once you understand that, well, then that's not a perfect hero, is it? Right? There's a lot of complexity there, and maybe you can find things that you say, wow, there's some very positive things there. There's some very encouraging things in this individual or that individual along the way. But there are also things that we have to recognize. There are also things that are not positive, that are not good. And then, you know, in a real sense, I think that tells us, those of us who are very imperfect, right? Okay, it's all right. You can still do great things, right? It's in a real sense, it is freeing, and that's what makes it so troubling. That again, we have these politicians today who want to deny that. They want to stick to this very narrow telling of our history. And I will tell you, one of the things that really was incredibly beneficial to me when I was a young person was to be around people who had made history, right? Epic figures. And I was lucky enough to be around them. People who were veterans of the Civil Rights Movement, people who were veterans, Abraham Lincoln Brigade vets from the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. All these folks, veterans of great labor organizing drives. And these people would tell their stories. And often, Santita, they would tell their stories in the most humble of ways. They say, yeah, I did this, or I did some of this. And then you step back and you realize, oh my gosh, you were doing this in this perspective of a global fight against fascism. You were doing this in the perspective of a fight against Jim Crow segregation and lynching and poll taxes and all that. Oh, you were doing this against the brutal economic oppression of the 1920s, 1930s in so many industries in the United States. And suddenly you find new heroes, right? You find, yeah. And then you're sitting there with this person who doesn't seem that different from you, just older and wiser. And you think, wow, if that person can do that, well, maybe it's possible to make some history of our own, right? Maybe we can pick up that gauntlet. And I think it's that sort of human connection, teaching history in that way, that terrifies the powerful most of all. Because I think that if there's a people's history that passes from one to another, from one group to another, then that becomes much more powerful than the lies that might be taught at the highest levels.
That's why I don't, in this current climate, I'll say this, I got to a Zoom call. Oh.
Yeah, me too. I know.
I don't do people's personal lives, okay? Now,
yeah, I know.
Thomas Jefferson's personal life was important because it was a political life. And when I say it was a political life, he was a slaveholder who kept as his common law wife his wife's half-sister, who was Sally Hemings. She was a black sister. Okay? Sally Hemings and Martha Jefferson had the same dad. So, and the fact that, the great figures of the day would go to their home and they said, there's some odd looking people around here. They look like white people, but they're working here. I don't understand why I'm being served. And by the way, they look like Thomas. Okay, I see what's going on here. All that's important, everybody. It's important that as George Washington was fighting for liberty, when his most trusted and most favored slave, Miss Oney Judge, they would get to Philadelphia, and I think you could stay there like 6 months. And he figured, and if you stayed there more than 6 months, the slaves were freed. So George Washington figured it out. He said, okay, he sent people back like a day early, so he'd keep them in slavery. She got hip to it, and she escaped. Do you know this man had her chased and pursued up through Canada? She died a pauper. She got married and had a family. But while he's fighting for freedom and liberty down here, he was chasing this little black woman down so she could come home and take care of his wife, and certainly not be an example to the other enslaved persons. So, but you know what? It's all of those things that made him who he is. Because that same man, with that contradiction, said, I will not be a king.
We are coming up with a new thing in America. I respect that. We're coming up with a new thing. No, I'm not going to be a king. No. We fought a revolution. Now, we left the kings and the queens behind. We're going to do something different here. It's all of those things that make us who we are. When you
And you know the best thing they did?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go.
No. You please go. Please.
You know the best thing they did? When they wrote that Constitution, which had so many flaws in it, some of those flaws continue to haunt us to this day, the Electoral College, but also the reality that they accepted the notion of 3/5 of a human being. So many flaws in that Constitution, but they did one thing that was really good. I'll argue several things. I like the Bill of Rights in many ways. But one thing that was quite striking, they said, well, you can amend this thing.
Okay.
You
How
can
about
change
that?
it. Right? Because that's an acknowledgement. That's an acknowledgement at the start from people who said, okay, we recognize that what we're doing here isn't perfect.
That's right.
And for better or worse, in an era of the so-called divine right of kings, if there were people who acknowledged that what they were doing wasn't perfect and that it could be changed, that in fact there was a whole system for it, a structure for it, it would need to be changed.
That's right.
That's something. Again, we teach a whole history, right? We teach all the negative parts.
Right.
But then, there's a positive part. Yeah, that's something good. Because that does suggest
it's the
improvement.
human part.
Yeah.
I mean, Benjamin Franklin, genius, brilliant, had the wildest personal life.
Oh,
All
yeah.
that made him who he... Look, people are who they are. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If someone has something great and good to give you, take it. Let's do that. And America's a great country. Yes, it is. I believe that. I've been all over this world, and I've lived a few other places outside of the United States. I don't want to be anyplace else, but that's just me. And I'm willing, my family, we're several hundred years in here. I'm willing to fight to make this work. I think we have an obligation to do that. And the fact is most Americans don't want to be anyplace else either, because we've come up with a new thing here. Now, what we have to do is get on the stick and make America work. Make it work. It works when you work it. That's what Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman used to say. It works when you work it. This is not self-executing. You must execute it. If you want a republic and not a monarchy, just a republic, everybody, that means you got to get involved. You've got to be active. How about that? Yeah. If you want a monarchy, let somebody else run it. But if you want a republic, you got to run things. You've got to get registered to vote. You got to make sure your neighbor is registered to vote and gets to the polls. You have to open up the voting process. You have to make sure there's a floor beneath which no human being can fall. You have to be clear that keep your head to the sky, open up the sky so everybody can be all that they want to be. Equal access to equal high quality education and health and living conditions and a home. God never made a mouth he couldn't feed, ever. God never gave you a vision without provision. Everything that you need to do on this earth, you should have the ability to do and the capability to do, and we need to swing open wide the gates of opportunity. That is what America is supposed to be, and we need to fight to make that happen, period.
Sister, I love you. You are the best.
You are the best. You get me fired up. What am I going to say?
It's all to the good.
That's right.
You got a Zoom call you got to do.
I sure do, and I'm late. But you get me fired up, John.
It's so good. Well, we will carry on.
I love
we will
you
carry
so much.
on. All right.
Okay, I love you so much. Oh, thank you so much. But we'll keep on walking, keep on marching up the freedom land. How about that? That's what the song tells us.
So many good struggles ahead.
Come on, well, we're in them.
We learn our history so we can march into the future.
Amen. I like that. I think I'll use that.
All right.
But I'll give you credit.
Well, you give me credit the first time, then the second time you'll say it occurred to me, and the third time, the old joke, right?
I know. That's why I pull up names because I think it's important for us to remember.
I do too. I do too.
I pull up
but
names.
I never mind, and I don't think you do either, when you have a good idea and people, if they suddenly start to take it in as their own. I think that's just fine. Yeah.
God's gonna give
Yeah.
you something else. Keep on going, y'all, please.
That's right.
I mean,
Because I
let
think
go.
people keep, and also the most powerful thing you can possibly do, that any of us can possibly do, is put an idea into the mix that people take as their own, right? Because then there'll be a day sometime in the future where folks will think of the Rainbow Coalition as just natural. They may not even know where it came from.
Well,
And
we think
we'll
of,
know, you and I.
well,
But
that's right. But you know what? Now, and the point, one of the things we've learned from Reverend is to keep it moving. Plant the seeds and keeps it moving. He does not wait for you to say thanks. He says if you need the carbon monoxide of thanks, you will choke. He said,
That's
and
right.
if you need thanks, you don't deserve it. Now, I happen to think you do need to say thank you. I think that's important.
Oh, we do.
But I hear him. He's not caught up. He's like, look, yeah, I did that. That's great. God helped me. God gave it to me, and I did what I was instructed to do. If anything I've learned from him, I've learned obedience. I've learned loyalty. I've learned faithfulness. I've learned, you know what? It's not about you, but it is about you to the extent that you care enough about yourself to keep your gifts, to protect your heart, protect your gifts, take care of your health, take care of your body, all of that. But after that, and you got to keep on going, keep on growing. I love you. I am late, and I just got a text, so I need to get on this call. But I love you.
You're about to go do so much good. I'll talk to you soon, my
You
dear.
are too. I love you. Thank you, everybody. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you.